Given the astounding success of The Last of Us, hopefully this gives studios a much better outlook on wanting to do high-quality video game adaptations, and ones that are actually faithful to the source material. That's the major distinction because there's been a lot so far that don't follow the source material at all. Halo. And The Last of Us is proof that there's a ton of unmined potential within the video game sphere because we are basically just getting started. For the first game on this list, since The Last of Us has had groundbreaking success, it only makes sense to adapt God of War. Initially upon writing this, I didn't even know that Amazon acquired the rights to do an adaptation of God of War back in December 2022. There hasn't really been any updates about it, so I'll also go into why this could make such a great adaptation, even though it's announced. Now, this would be a very challenging game to adapt given how huge the scale of it is, along with the budget probably needing to be massive. Out of all the studios to acquire it though, Amazon would most likely be willing to write a blank check for the show, given that the Rings of Power costed over $1 billion. However, if they didn't want to casually drop another $1 billion, you could start the show at God of War 2018. The budget will still need to be pretty large, but at least the story will be more manageable to tell at a slightly smaller scale in comparison to the first 3 games. Given that at its core, it's primarily a father and son adventure, so that's a pretty easy story to tackle for a show format. Kratos and Atreus are complex characters, and their rich dynamic will anchor down the story. Kratos learns to become a better father and opens up to his son, while Atreus learns to become more mature and to be more like a warrior. There's a strong progression for both of these characters, so every dialogue scene they have together should be very engaging. That's one thing that most video game adaptations require. If it doesn't have a strong base story with great characters, then it would be really hard to translate it over to shows and movies. Like the biggest example of this is Doom. There really isn't much of a story or characters in Doom, and it's predominantly carried by its gameplay. It does have some cool background lore, but you also need a great plot. For shows and movies, you can't just have non-stop action with barely any dialogue. Because if you do that, you won't be able to form an attachment to the characters, and the audience will slowly stop caring about the narrative. A good story makes you care about the action, and without one, you won't be invested or have any stakes in the action. So on the other side of this coin, you have God of War, 2 lovable characters who go on a fun journey across the realms. Any action along the way is investing because you like the characters, and you want to see them achieve their goal. I just wanted to quickly go over that because I won't be including games that are solely based on good gameplay. Going into how much meat God of War has to offer, you can easily do a whole season per game, at least pertaining to the last 2 God of Wars. I think there's enough there, and even though there are some repetitive sections within those games, you can cut them out and tighten up the pace for the narrative. I also think that choosing God of War 2018 as a starting point will make Kratos an even more intriguing character given how mysterious his past is. Because throughout the game, the writers allude to what happened in the past. So if anything, skipping the first 3 games won't hinder the overall story because God of War 2018 essentially hits the restart button. You can start it at the very beginning and go into the tragedy of Kratos' origin, but you'll have to make some heavy changes to the story because I'd assume viewers won't want to watch Kratos go to the underworld 3 separate times. Out of all the adaptations I'll be going into, this is at the top of my list. Another dream come true would be a proper adaptation of Halo, since the Paramount Plus show doesn't exist to me. Now, this is much harder material to adapt in comparison to other games given that Master Chief is kind of just a vessel for the player. He has extremely light characterization and only Halo 4 really makes an effort to humanize him. So telling his story, if anything, kind of feels like a trap. You'd either have to make major changes to the source material to make Master Chief more of a character, similar to the Paramount Plus show, so that you can sympathize and relate to him. But also not like the show where they make him overly emotional, he barely has his helmet on, and they even give him nude scenes. Or if you don't make any changes to Master Chief, you have a main protagonist that barely talks. I keep seeing people say that they would love a show with this faithfulness to Chief, but again, without a proper character to be attached to who barely speaks or emotes, then the story will have a hard time operating. Games can get away with this because it's more objective based and you become the character. For shows and movies, we witness a story without having any input. Since Master Chief would be very difficult to adapt without ruining him, I would recommend adapting a story within the Halo universe that doesn't involve Chief, or at least doesn't make him the main character. That may be a controversial opinion, but that also seems to be the most realistic and easiest of the options. There's also a lot of material to choose from that doesn't even include Master Chief, but I'll only look at the existing games. Currently the most adaptable, and that also happens to be one of the best stories, is Halo Reach. This is an outstanding setting, and witnessing a society collapse from an alien invasion is awesome. Halo Reach also has a good roster of characters. Now, they aren't as rich as the main characters in The Last of Us and God of War, but it wouldn't betray the source material to expand upon these characters. They're all pretty distinct and varied, so you'll be able to make some good pairings throughout the miniseries, which is what I think Halo Reach will fit the best as. Each mission would lend pretty well to a separate episode, given that they are consistently changing settings, and in each episode, they can spend time developing a certain character within the squad with the main character. Also, for the main character, he doesn't have much of a personality and is even more of a vessel for the player than Master Chief, so you'll have to change him and make him an actual character. You can lead into how he's pitched as in the game, in which he's a lone wolf with a mysterious past. This could naturally offer as a point of conflict between the main character and the team, and through the story, he learns the value of teamwork and is reinvigorated by the camaraderie of his new family, thus changing him into a character with more heart and someone with warmth. At first, he could be doubtful about the effectiveness of his team, and attempts to get things done on his own in a selfish manner and is more closed off. Then, through the course of the show, all these negative aspects are peeled away through different selfless and kind acts made by his team. I think this could offer a solid character arc for Noble Six, and can easily add a deeper layer to him. That, and you don't have to make him the main character since he'll inherently be a bit unlikable towards the beginning. So instead, you could mostly focus on the squad as a whole, while slowly pivoting towards Noble Six as being the main point of view, who is slowly winning the hearts of the audience. The overall story arc for Halo Reach is pretty great, and I would go into more depth about it, but that would be going into spoilers, and I kinda want to stay away from them in this video, since I'll be touching on a wide array of games. But the story acts as a mad dash to save humanity, and the squad we follow are integral in that goal, and the actions they make carry a massive amount of weight. This can easily be a very epic, fun, and emotional journey carried out by this lovable squad of Spartans. It's just really depressing that this probably won't come to fruition for a while, given that Paramount Plus is doing their own show and that doesn't even follow the source material.
Man, that shit pissed me off, man.
Dead Space. This is a game that I'm genuinely surprised hasn't been adapted into a horror movie yet, or even hearing any development around a possible movie. Because between everything on this list, this is probably the easiest material to adapt because of the simple premise of the game. This crew responds to a distress signal in space, and they are met with nightmarish and eldritch horrors, and the crew then has to escape. The premise in of itself is perfect for a movie, and the atmosphere in the game is extremely immersive. The dilapidating interiors, blood-soaked and terrifying displays of gore and body horror strewn throughout the environment, creepy lighting and atmosphere that always hammers home a feeling of dread. This is literally a perfect horror environment. In the hands of a competent horror director, this should be a surefire hit. Even though the premise itself isn't entirely original, the designs of the monsters and how everything operates is very intriguing. Like the mystery behind the marker and how it affects people would constantly keep a hook in the audience. Along with it potentially being cool visually, how the filmmakers would portray the hysteria induced by the marker. As for how the story of the game translates to a movie, it should definitely be cut down because the game is mostly a string of objectives of repairing the Ishimura. Having to repair basically the entire ship was mostly a story mechanic to artificially elongate the game. This is fine for the game because they keep introducing new gameplay elements to keep things fresh and interesting. But for a movie, you need to keep the narrative moving at a satisfying pace. So any filmmaker would definitely need to cut it down, and from there, you could cherry pick the many horror set pieces from the game. That and the climax is pretty insane, so the ending should definitely still be great for the movie. In terms of budget, it should definitely be pretty manageable because most of the game takes place in closed interiors, meaning that you could shoot all of this on enclosed sets on a soundstage. The amount of VFX shouldn't be too crazy, and I'd much prefer to see some practical necromorphs. If any filmmaker were to go with solely VFX necromorphs, then that would be extremely saddening. But overall, I'd assume this will probably be adapted soon, especially since the popularity around the game has surged from the outstanding reception of the remake. Bioshock. Now this game has been blue-balling gamers because there has been news about a movie for this game ranging back to pre-2010. Studios were scared to make the movie because making a very high-budget rated R movie seemed like a guaranteed flop. However, a year and a half ago, it was announced that this game is actually being developed by Netflix in a partnership with 2K Games. It's being directed by Francis Lawrence, who directed the last 3 Hunger Games and I Am Legend. So it's in the hands of a competent director, and the studio that developed the game is involved. The only thing about this adaptation though, and why I'm including this, is that we haven't received much updates about this project, and that makes me worried given what happened in the past. But going into why Bioshock would make a magnificent adaptation is because it checks off a lot of boxes. The world of Rapture is incredibly immersive and is a constant visual feast. The underwater city lends itself to so many unique and cool set pieces of withering structures that have so much environmental storytelling. The entire background behind the architecture is just so intriguing, and so is all the story surrounding it. This could lead to such a thought-provoking script because the world is constantly oozing with so much subtext about what happened to this dystopian society. It has engaging themes like that of class, inequality, unchecked capitalism, and abuse of power leading to the fall of the city. There's also a lot of vibrant and unhinged characters throughout this world, and given that there's so much dialogue communicated over a radio, there should never be any down moments within the script. Along with there being an outstanding twist towards the end of the game that completely shatters your perception of the story. Then there's also the brilliant designs of the augmented humans like Slicers and Big Daddies that would be so cool to see done in live action. Really, every aspect about the game carried over into a movie or miniseries setting will be an instant classic. So hopefully Netflix actually commits to making this project and gives them a big enough budget. Because another thing that makes me really excited about the Netflix adaptation is that it's being written by the writer of Blade Runner 2049. That pace and overall aesthetic from that movie would fit perfectly in Bioshock, and if they somehow got Roger Deakins as a cinematographer, then I'd probably pass out. Resident Evil 7. This would be a pretty simple adaptation honestly, and the main reason why I'm choosing the 7th entry is because A, it's not an overly complex story and is mainly about surviving this crazy family, and B, there's been a lot of failed adaptations for the first couple of games, so I'd like to see them try some different games in the franchise. I admittedly haven't played Resident Evil 4 yet, and really want to, so I wouldn't be surprised if that would also make for a great movie as well. But for Resident Evil 7, making it a pure horror movie of Ethan slowly trying to overcome the psychotic hillbilly family with powers would make for a riveting ride. It's also extremely similar to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so the story should already function within a movie or miniseries format. If it were in a miniseries format, you could have each episode where Ethan overcomes one of the members of the family, and thus becomes more hardened as a character. Or if it were a movie, you can condense down some of the set pieces a bit and make it a perfect 2 hours. Like ideally probably cut out the whole boat sequence, which felt a bit weird, and try to tackle the same story revelation in a different manner. I would go into that more, but I'm refraining from going into spoilers. Talking about it vaguely though, the general background to the story and how this family ended up the way they did is really a tragedy, and it uncovers a whole nother layer to the story that gives it a lot of depth, and doesn't just make this family a bunch of psychos. It makes them a lot more sympathetic, and by the end of the game, you kind of just feel bad for them. The main character would probably need a little bit more characterization, but at the end of the day, it is really a story of survival, and that is always a great time for horror movies. Overwatch. I'm honestly really surprised that I even have to include this game because you'd assume that Blizzard would have made an animated movie or series by this point. Like, the game has been out for 7 years. God damn, I feel old now. However, as I was making this video, Blizzard did release an animated miniseries for Overwatch. Although it's extremely short in length, and for that runtime it was pretty good. So the question stands, why the hell isn't Blizzard contracting studios to make longer form content? It's definitely not a money issue, since Blizzard as a company is reeling in $1 to $2 billion of net income a year. So greenlighting an animated series or movie shouldn't be that big of a deal, and if anything, it would just make them more money. It's maddening because the possibilities are truly endless, and you can go into so many outstanding directions for an Overwatch series. You could go the arcane route and make a rich and grounded drama and go into the complexities of the world and select characters. You could go down a more anthology route, where each episode follows one or a few heroes as they carry out their most important missions. Or you can even make the show like that amazing and epic Clone Wars show back in the day, where you have massive battles with a huge scale. Literally, the possibilities are endless, and I'd assume you'd love to watch any of the 3 pitches I mentioned. So the fact that we really have none of that is truly heartbreaking from the untapped potential. There are so many cool and interesting characters that I would love to learn more about. The game only scratches the surface for these characters in terms of development, and it feels like fans have been blueballed for so long in terms of getting to know them more. For me personally, I only know the surface level for each of the characters in Overwatch, and I would love to get a deep dive and learn much more about them. That and the world of Overwatch is definitely intriguing enough to carry a show. So when Cuphead of all IPs gets 3 seasons before Blizzard does practically anything with Overwatch is really depressing. I don't know what the hell management is doing over there, and surely all the money they're milking out of players with absurd shop prices and battle passes can give them enough money for a proper show. Red Dead Redemption 2. Out of Rockstar's catalog, this seems like the best pick, which isn't downplaying GTA 5, which could also make for an interesting miniseries. But I think the story for Red Dead Redemption 2 is a bit better. A group of outlaws who are all colorful and sympathetic in their own way would make for a fun perspective to follow for a big sprawling adventure. They're all essentially anti-heroes and morally complex characters who aren't just good or bad, and that makes riveting subjects in my opinion, along with a deep dynamic and synergies between all of them. The main reason why I'm bringing up Red Dead Redemption 2, besides the fact that it has a great story, is that westerns in general have really fallen off over the years, which is kind of sad to be honest. They used to be so dominant back in the day, and there are really only a small handful of good westerns that have come out in the last 10 years. So it would be really exciting to see a big return to this genre that would ideally be followed by a big budget. Which this would also kind of be a first in that we don't have that many other big budget western period shows. The only 2 that come to mind is Deadwood and Hell on Wheels, so there's basically no competition right now for this area, and I would love the variety. That, and I think Red Dead Redemption 2 could find a really good balance between story/character development and action, given that there are many action set pieces in the game that could easily be cherry-picked. But yeah, RDR2 seems like a pretty easy layup to the point that I'm surprised no studios have taken an interest in it yet. Little Nightmares. Now this may be a surprise to you that I'm including this game, and some of you may not have heard of Little Nightmares. It's an indie horror game in which you have to navigate a hostile, malformed, and dark world with horrors awaiting around every corner. The monster designs in this game are really unsettling and plays into the childlike perspective of exaggerated horrors. The world is extremely harsh and foreboding for you as a player, and there is so much detail within the world that is the main driver for storytelling. Every environment tells a deeply tragic and dark story that as you progress through the game, it's like you are slowly piecing together a jigsaw puzzle as to what happened here. There's also no dialogue within the game, so it makes the mystery of this world that much more alluring. So right away, I think this would make for a perfect stop-motion horror adventure. The crazy thing is that this project was actually being developed, and it was oddly enough being spearheaded by Anthony and Joe Russo. I honestly just chanced upon the project as I was looking through their IMDb page, but the Little Nightmares adaptation was going to be directed by the legendary Henry Selick, who directed both The Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline. So the potential behind this project was huge, and it's really depressing that the project ended up fizzling out, because this world fits perfectly for that kind of dark stop-motion aesthetic, along with the story actually being pretty riveting, especially for the second game in which there are some pretty big and surprising twists. So yeah, I just wanted to call out this game since the world is so immersive and would be a really fun adventure if the right talent wanted to make it. Gears of War. Similar to Bioshock, it feels like Gears of War has been in a perpetual development hell for adaptations. And again, like Bioshock, it seems that Netflix is stepping in and making it a reality. The main reason why I'm including this game is that I really love the premise of the game, and it could make for a cool, gritty sci-fi war epic. These kind of genre blends are really rare, and that is why I'm craving it so much, and so are you most likely. Just like Halo, fighting a war against an alien-like threat, where we are actively learning about them as the story goes on, makes the threat much more terrifying, along with there being cool reveals for different enemy types throughout the story to keep things fresh and exciting. There's so many fun and cool set pieces through the initial trilogy to the point that they can definitely do a movie for each game. Like, I would love to see the worm set piece from the second game without going into spoilers. Then from a story and character perspective, you can definitely create a solid pace since every character is pretty varied and iconic. I'd love some actual sit-down scenes with these characters since we don't really get that from the games. All the dialogue is done while they are walking through the world when they aren't engaged in combat, but each of their backstories are deep enough to be explored to a good extent. Like the main character Marcus has an air of mystery to him in the first game as to why he's locked up and what he did, along with his worldviews fundamentally contrasting different characters. That and his strict and mean persona has a fun dynamic with other characters who are more lighthearted and fun. So from a world, story, character, and action perspective, this should be easily accomplishable with a good budget that I hope Netflix commits to and actually provides. Dave Bautista is practically begging to be in the movie, so please make that a reality. Now, for my last pick, there's quite a few games that I would love to see, like an Outlast horror movie, someone trying to tackle the rich world of Half-Life, or even a fun blockbuster Call of Duty action movie. But for the last game I'll talk about is Wolfenstein. And the reason why I'm choosing this game is that I think it could be a very fun and over-the-top action movie or show, given that the games have so many crazy enemies like oversized robotic panzerhounds, or colossal mechs that the Nazis somehow made. It's just such a batshit ridiculous concept that you can't help but love how creative and fun it is. So the style of filmmaking that I would absolutely love to see attached to the Wolfenstein franchise is Bollywood filmmaking. This would make a perfect pairing because the over-exaggerated aspects of action in those movies that clearly don't follow logic and are just there to emphasize and elevate the action past reality would mix perfectly with the crazy world of Wolfenstein. Like, I don't care, make Blazkowicz a fucking godlike entity in the game who can dual-wield massive machine guns and solo the entire Nazi army. If you purely go off the rails with the action, then the fans would adore this project. Now, the story concept has been done before, but I would love to see it done in the Bollywood action style. I know I said in the beginning of the video that gameplay-dominated games won't make for great adaptations, but I think Wolfenstein still has a solid story. It fits in really well into the story dynamic of an underdog, and would make the conflict that Blazkowicz has to overcome pretty riveting, along with there being some vibrant and fun characters along the way. It's not like the games don't have any story, because there's actually quite a bit of cinematic storytelling within this series. This obviously won't rival like The Last of Us for storytelling quality, but the action is the true highlight here, because who wouldn't love watching Nazis get obliterated in the most insane ways possible? That would be my dream from an action standpoint for this IP, and from there, you could really do whatever you want with the story and depart from the games for all I care. The main game does have a pretty iconic villain besides just Hitler, but you can really make any villain within that world iconic with creative and out there designs. So would anyone actually make this, and would this be a realistic dream? Probably not. I doubt studios would actually have the balls to make this. However, given that Twisted Metal didn't really take itself seriously and was a fun joyride, then this type of adaptation could be possible. By the way, I have a Patreon, and this video is voted on by my patrons. So if you want to support me, check out the different tiers, and the link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know what video game adaptations you'd want to see the most in the comments.